The Adams Archive.
A federal judge ordered Biden's administration to stop efforts to censor social media companies. Now, this is a landmark decision by a federal judge. Now, this isn't a long-standing decision. This was done as an initial decision awaiting the full trial of this decision. But this was the initial decision as a result. So here we go. This is from the Post Millennial. It says, on Tuesday, a federal judge ruled that the Biden administration likely violated the First Amendment in its contact with social media companies to censor content and criticism during the COVID pandemic. U.S. District Judge Terry Doughty of Louisiana, in a 155-page ruling, blocked officials within the White House and multiple federal agencies from contacting social media companies with the intention of censoring political views and other speech protected under the First Amendment, according to the Wall Street Journal. The evidence produced thus far depicts an almost dystopian scenario, wrote Judge Doughty. During the COVID-19 pandemic, a period perhaps best characterized by widespread doubt and uncertainty, the United States government seems to have assumed a role similar to the Orwellian Ministry of Truth, which they, if you recall, actually tried to put together a Ministry of Truth. You remember that? Kind of went away, but they tried. Right? They tried to actually put together a entity within the government that would decide what was fact and what was not fact and push that out to the social media companies. It says the Attorney General has alleged that the Biden administration was using a federal censorship enterprise and pressured social media platforms to remove posts questioning COVID-19 health policies, the origin of the pandemic, questions regarding the results of the 2020 election, the Hunter Biden laptop story, among other topics, which, again, I was a part of that. For 8 months, my account was shadow banned on Instagram. 8 months of the 16 months that it's been around. It was completely shadow banned since 4 months into it, where it grew like crazy, and then shadow banned for 8 full months where I couldn't get 2,000 views on my videos with 35, 40,000 followers. And it was because I posted a video that came from InfoWars that broke down the Burisma deal that we are just figuring out. They have 17 audio recordings of, but I posted that over a year ago, and I got shadow banned into oblivion by Instagram for that one singular post for over 8 full months, where I got zero traction on anything. And this isn't somebody complaining like, oh, they shadow banned. No, like you could not search my name on Instagram. Could not search me, could not find me, all because I spoke the truth, which is coming out today in all of these hearings about Hunter Biden, Burisma, the recordings with Burisma, Joe Biden, the big guy, all of these federal indictments that are going on around us. But the CIA, the government, Joe Biden's administration, actively reached out to social media companies, the FBI, as Mark Zuckerberg came out and said that they were actively shadow banning people and banning them outright. It says that if the allegations made by the plaintiffs are true, the present case arguably involves the most massive attack against free speech in United States history, the injunction adds, according to Fox News. In their attempts to suppress alleged disinformation, the federal government, and particularly the defendants named here, are alleged to have blatantly ignored the First Amendment's right to free speech. Doughty also wrote that censorship in this case almost exclusively targeted conservative speech, but added that the issues raised in the case extended beyond party lines. Viewpoint discrimination is an especially egregious form of content discrimination, Doughty wrote. The government must abstain from regulating speech when the specific motivating ideology of the perspective of the speaker is in the rationale for the restriction. So, in what might have been the single largest win for freedom of speech today, to date, over the last, decade, easily, is this federal judge. So, thank you very much, Judge Doughty, because, again, all speech happens on these platforms. When we talk about freedom of speech, we're not sitting in a circle singing Kumbaya at some bar like we were back in 1776. Freedom of speech today does not mean standing in front of somebody and speaking. It extends to the platforms where 95% of speech happens, which is on social media platforms. Constantly. That's where civil discourse happens today. That is the watering hole. That is the bar that people meet at. That is the community. That is the groups. And when you censor people from speaking out on topics about the government, you are an authoritarian. That is authoritarianism. When you actively censor the opposing opinion, that type of shit is what starts revolutions. Not saying that that's what should happen. And I hope to God it doesn't have to. And if we keep winning this culture war, it won't have to, because we are winning. We are absolutely winning. Target moved all of their Tuck It Pride stuff to the back of the store. Bud Light literally fired all of the executives that were a part of those decision makings with the Dylan Mulvaney situation. Now we have social media not allowing any input from the government due to this ruling. On top of that, Bud Light closed down several of its manufacturing plants as a result of this. We are actively winning the culture war, which could not have been said about conservatism or the right in, I don't know, freaking ever. Conservatives have been losing the culture war. They lose it when it comes to music, when it comes to entertainment. It's all owned by liberals, even the news. And for the very first time that we've seen in my lifetime, in our generation, and probably the last 150 years, 100 years at least, I can speak to, we are winning the culture war. And we can't let up. And people are starting to realize that it's cool. It's cool to not want to dye your hair purple and run around naked at a children's event. People think it's cool that you have conservative values, and maybe you want to raise a family, and maybe you want to raise a family right. Maybe you want to have multiple children on a piece of land with chickens and self-sustaining lifestyles, and homeschool your children because you don't want the government teaching them propaganda that's built into the education system that's bought and paid for by the very same companies who are shoving and peddling their own profit or their own products down your throat, which are poisoning you for profitability. For the very first time, people are waking up to this and people are realizing it. And at the same time, we are winning the culture war with our dollars. And you see these things come out about the CEI scores, and you see these things come out about, the, CGI, and like all of these like woke ideologies that are being pushed shoved into the sphere of commercial corporatism through trying to make companies push these woke ideologies for investments from companies like BlackRock, right? That's why the CEI score was even became a thing, was because they wanted to have these companies push the ideology and have incentive to do so despite lack of profitability from their decision making. Because if every time that Target pushes something to the back of the store, they lose money, they're going to stop pushing this ideology. Capitalism does not care about your feelings. It does not care about your political leanings. It does not care about, what your sexual orientation is. It shouldn't. It doesn't. Profitability has no sexual orientation. Profitability has no political orientation. So when you realize that, and we are a community, a group who can then put our dollars together and go, we are no longer going to take this. We are not going to allow you to shove sexual books down our children's throat at Barnes & Noble when I walk in the door. We are not going to allow you to put swimsuits on the rack in front of my children that shows a tuck it area for boys acting like they're girls. We're not going to accept this. Right. And we're seeing that bleed over into the education system, where homeschooling's up like an unbelievable percentage since the COVID pandemic. Right. You see people starting to take ownership of their parenting, take ownership of their children, and realize that all of these organizations, from the pharmaceutical industries to the medical industries to the military industrial complexes to the educational industrial complex, to all of these organizations, the food industries, all of it does not have your best interest in mind. It doesn't have your children's best interest in mind. And as parents, it is our job to protect our children. And whether it's easier to give them a Lunchable than it is to make a homemade healthy meal, or whether it's easier to send them off to public school than it is to sit at home with them and teach your child the proper way of the proper histories that we have, and not what's being pushed through, the organizations and educational entities that are pushing books that are literally the same organizations that are owned by Ghislaine Maxwell's father. Was it Maxwell House? Remember Maxwell House, the education system, the books that went to your schools? Maxwell House was owned by Ghislaine Maxwell's dad, a alleged Mossad spy. And so when you start to connect all of these dots and you realize that all of these corporations do not have your best interest in mind, and not just the corporations, but the government too. The public school system is designed for obedience, not education. Our food is designed to poison you, not make you healthy. And the reason they poison you is because they need to feed you the pharmaceutical drugs. And the reason they feed you those pharmaceutical drugs is because they make ungodly profits off of your sickness. And it all starts by educating you to believe that the government is daddy, not you. And the corporations are mommy, not you. And so as you start to unwind the fabric of our society, unwind the fabric of our government, and realize that none of these institutions have you or your child's best interest in mind. Ever. Ever. And the only thing they want to do is profit off of you. And sometimes that means poisoning you so that they can feed you the antidote. I don't know how we got there. Let's move on.